lose all your power because in the past, your telephone line continues to work, and a lot of them taking phone calls on their landline. Obviously, that's ruled out, and there's a power outage and you're on NBN. So, what are the options there to try and mitigate that risk?
I mean, I'll just confirm that all the fibre-based technologies require power. Because your telephony services move to a VoIP-based service that's fed through your modem, that's plugged in. Also, all your devices are, the new phones that work are all plugged in. So in terms of solutions, NBN has some recommendations on our websites about what you can do in a power outage, but I'm sure the retailers also have their own solutions that they can speak to.
Yeah, UPS is generally the way to go.
We probably shouldn't all answer every question because we'll all be here all night. But being the first one, we'll indulge ourselves. What I say to most of the people I talk to around power and losing power is that in most instances, the ice cream's melting, the computers have turned off, the FPOS terminal's not transacting, all those other things are happening. So unless it's the type of business where you've got quite good power redundancy, so failover with generators or a really significant UPS in place, you're probably going to have to shut the business for the duration of that power outage. Some of the other effects, though, during those storms and things that we've seen in places like Coffs Harbour when they got hit with a really big hailstorm, was that local infrastructure was damaged. Network infrastructure and bits and pieces. The mobile network stands up very quickly, and that's where that proposition around business grade, failing over to 4G, the power might be off for a couple of hours, it might be off for a day. It comes up pretty quickly for all the obvious reasons. So you are at the limitation of power as you are with everything else in the business. So as I say, if it's the sort of business that you need power failover, then you'd connect this hardware to that same redundancy.
I think that's one of the things a lot of people didn't realise that, with the NBN, they're going to lose their landline at an outage, and that's been missing a lot of my customers. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm just going to get Brad to tell us what UPS is.
It's sorry, Jeff was saying, what is it? Yeah. It's basically a battery backup. It looks like a little shoebox. It's got a couple of batteries in it, and it gives you power for up to about half an hour, which is pretty good for if it's just a quick sort of loss of power. The more extreme, where you've got mass outages, obviously it's not going to last that long. But it's cheap, it's affordable, and you're running a business. It's kind of neat to have it there.
And where do you get it?
You can, IT service providers definitely is the way. Service providers like we also provide that as well. Yeah.
Kylie?
Kylie from Mayhem here. I have two questions. I'll give you the easy question first. You put up on your slide there when the rollout's going to happen, which is between March and May or whatever, fundamentally. But is that everybody within March to May gets it?
So we've actually started construction. So in the Shire, we started construction probably bits of fibre to the basement in July of last year. So there are some businesses that are connected, especially in that HFC space. But in terms of the fibre to the curb construction, which is the majority of the Shire, will be on those access technologies. So the fibre to the curb and the fibre to the basement more on your multi-dwelling units or multi-dwelling residents. We've really ramped up construction in January to March, so that's when our construction timeframes will be ramping up till. It's typically about 6 months, so you will see in the next 6 to 8 months where the majority of the Shire will become ready for service. That's not everywhere. It's a progressive rollout. There's some areas that go a bit later and some areas that go a bit earlier, but I would recommend, as part of a business pre-preparedness, you go on our website, you speak to your preferred retailer, you check when you're anticipated to be ready for service.
So is there somewhere online that we can go on to put in whatever suburb it is and it'll tell us when it's ready?
You can actually put your specific address and it will tell you when you'll be ready to connect, which technology you'll be connected to, and then give you resources based on that technology about what you need to. And that's on the NBN website, and I know some of the retailers also have their own websites that have rollout maps as well. I'll provide my whole presentation, and it has a link that Chamber. But yeah, it's just nbn.com.au, and you can, yeah.
Can I just get you to explain a bit more about HFC and what it actually is and how it's different to the fibre?
Yeah, so with the HFC, instead of using the copper network, we're using the Telstra cable network as the final part of our network. So we'll bring fibre to a point like we do with the other technologies, and then leverage the existing cable. Now, we have put a pause on sales over our HFC network for the next about 6 months to do some additional upgrade and remediation work on that network. We will let businesses know as soon as that work has been done, so you'll be ready to order an NBN service. That said, there are some businesses in the Shire that have already connected via the HFC or the cable network. If they should see an improvement to that service once that upgrade work has taken place over the next 6 months. So you're in a scenario where everybody, HFC, fibre to the curb, fibre to the node, in the next 6 months, that's really going to ramp up in terms of businesses being ready to connect.
I'll go there, and then that.
Oh, come on.
Hi, Karen, Stone Research. Just explain to me how the exchange fits into this, because we know we have a very old telephone exchange in the Shire. So how does that affect everything that's happening?
So we take over the exchanges, so the Cronulla, the Miranda exchange, we take over the exchanges from Telstra. We then put our own equipment, so totally separate equipment. We upgrade the exchanges if necessary, and then we roll out from that exchange. So you have both networks working simultaneously. In terms of capacity, we build excess capacity for the number of premises there. We also, because we are the provider of last resort now in the Shire for any new development, sub-development, things like that, we need to take that into consideration. So what there is in terms of equipment from a Telstra perspective does not impact NBN's equipment. We put our own equipment, we just utilise the physical location of that exchange. Yes, so our rollout sequencing tends to be based on when we take over that exchange, the amount of work we need to do on the exchange, and then we roll out from there.
So I have a two-part question. The first part is for the NBN lady, and the second part you can fight over. So the first part is, once you get the letter that says that the NBN has come to your area, and I'm in a commercial building, does that mean that it's come to the basement of that building, into the street? Like, where is it actually?
You can have a look online. I can have a look as soon as we're done here. I hate to just guess, but it probably was a fibre to the basement type arrangement, yes. Typically in your multi-dwelling buildings, we take a fibre connection always to that comms cabinet in the building, and then we leverage the existing copper if it is copper, or cable if it's cable, to connect you to the NBN network.
Okay, so part two is, as a tenant in a multi-storey building, is it the responsibility of my landlord to take it from the basement to my office, and then is it my responsibility to go from my office to all of my phones, faxes, where does that responsibility lie?
Oh, look, I'll specifically have a look, but typically when we build, there'll be a copper connection already connecting you from that comms cabinet to your business. That should be there unless it's a new building.
Nothing new has to go there.
No, in a fibre to the basement scenario, obviously fibre to the premise is a little bit different, but a fibre to the basement, we use the existing copper, so we're not running fibre up the building. Yeah.
How about older residential places, fibre to
multi-dwelling units? Yeah, so typically we do roll out fibre to the basement to any multi-dwelling units, high-rises, where we take fibre into the comms cabinet, there's room in the rack, we go in there, and then we use the existing copper to connect your home to the...
fibre to all the units.
Okay, Okay, so you've got a fibre-based network. Yeah, so look, different addresses will have different scenarios. So we can specifically look into it for you.
I just think the renting question hasn't really been answered.
Oh, sorry, the renting question.
Well, I think I understand now. So if you've brought it into the basement, you're going to use the existing wiring that will go to all the tenancies, and then it's up to me then to just...
Putting your equipment. So in a different scenario where it was a fibre to the premise scenario where we had to run conduit and put in physical equipment, obviously you'd need to speak to your landlord before you put in physical equipment. So if NBN required to do civils in your shop, then you would need to speak to your landlord. But in a fibre to the basement scenario, we're not doing any civil work inside of that premise, so to speak. The body corporate is who we'd be working with to put that equipment in the basement.
So if I'm doing that horrific thing and moving, okay, and I'm going to a new building, I just have to check that it's gone to the basement, and then I just assume that the existing infrastructure is there to the part that I'm renting. Would that be correct? Yeah.
Yes, in an existing, unless it's a new development.
It may not necessarily be the basement, a bit of comms cupboard or something of that sort. It depends on the building, site by site.
Okay.
And because there are about 4 or 5 different technologies being rolled out, it's going to be different at each site as well. And that's why you need to check. And often we need to do
Often you need to do a site survey on the sites, but the NBN site is very good. It actually does tell you the technology that's available, that it certainly goes past your house. And in the Shire, I think we're one of 3 areas, I think, in Australia that's actually going fibre to the curb. And that's one of the best technologies as far as speed is concerned. Fibre, so the HFC is, as we just talked about, is actually over the old Foxtel network release. That's the Foxtel cable network. So if you've got HFC, and you're at home, and you've got Foxtel, then you've got 9/10 of it there already. So the process is fairly easy. So it does depend on site to sites.
Yeah, I was an early adopter of the NBN. I have a small home business, but my question is around reliability. The reliability that I've experienced sometimes has absolutely been shocking. I can tell you from here, I ended up taking notes throughout November. I had 20 times during November when the system went down. Just recently, we had 20 hours of outage at Illinois, that's where I live. And trying to get information from my provider as to what is going on is just an absolute nightmare. Fortunately for you guys, it's none of you. But it's just so frustrating knowing that the system is down, check this, check that. If you can get through to a support line, and that's the other thing, that chat line, the support line, it's just a nightmare and a complete waste of time.
You can answer it. So, I mean, that's one of the points of the business grade service. So, we have new and upgraded services actually coming out in about a month, I believe it is, where there's new modems that are actually coming out which have the 4G card built into them already, so that it automatically switches over. So if the network goes down for whatever reason, and it does, it happens always, if the network goes down, it seamlessly switches over to the 4G network, so you can still continue on with your internet and your telephone calls. And an important factor too, and we talked about power outages before, and you'll see there's a blue board on the back there near the bar. That's for alarm systems. A lot of people don't think about their alarm systems because your alarm system actually needs to if you've got insurance on your building and you've got one of the things the boxes you tick that say that you've actually got, do you have an alarm system there? And Brett will correct me here because I've get this wrong, but you need to have 8 hours, I think it is, 8 hours of service available. So if you haven't got the right backup facilities there, then if it's not battery operated and it doesn't switch over automatically to 4G, then you may be voiding your insurance policy as well. So one of the things that we offer, there's a service that's it actually now enables to automatic transition.
The teething problems, I can get that. But I've got to tell you, I'm traumatised. Every time I see a Vision Stream truck by the pitch at the top of the road, I think, oh my God, I'm coming home to a disaster. That's how it's got me. But nowadays, when it works, it's great. Believe me, when it works, it's great.
So from the faults perspective, with Telstra, we've got really great diagnostic tools with NBN, as do most of the other providers. Some use aggregators, so they might have to then get in touch with who they're aggregating through in order to do those diagnostics. But I know on the business side of things, we can see down to the point of if you've left the receiver off or bumped the receiver off on the phone, or if the cordless has been stolen by a 2-year-old monster and is under a pillow and they're trying to dial Switzerland or whatever combination of numbers they can find. So obviously during peak outages, and they do happen, then getting through can be a nightmare. You might be sitting on hold for half an hour or an hour, which is just terrible. The stats that we have, though, is that the customers on our business bundles that have the 4G failover don't call in, because they, in most cases, don't even realise that this has happened. That's the whole reason why we do this failover. It used to be something years ago that we offered on a copper equivalent product for, it was about $15, $20 a month. It's something that in the NBN environment we don't charge for. It's just included as part of that differential that we give to our business customers. The other thing that's coming a little bit later in the year, I think it's still a few months off, is that for all of our business bundle customers on NBN, we'll be providing a monthly report of when and for how long you used your 4G failover, so that you can actually work out, hang on, what is going on? Did I have those 20 outages? Hopefully you won't even notice. Obviously in some cases you will. So I'd love to have a chat to you afterwards and also just find out what access type you're using, because there is quite a bit of variation.
Just a question on that. Does that mean that Ian's problem is an NBN problem, or it's his telco problem because they haven't bought enough space in the pipe to send the data? So if he changes provider to get the 4G backup, will Ian have the same problem, or may...
You need to check from front to back, all the way. So right down to what modem are you using, how's it plugged in, what's going on in the house, are there other sockets and things in use, is there something that needs to be cut off that's causing interference, what's going on in the street, what's going on back to the nearest aggregation point.
And that's a telco person, a fixer, or an IT person, obviously not NBN.
So whoever you receive a bill from is charged with the responsibility of figuring this out. Now, if the actual resolution is that someone put a backhoe through NBN's cable down the road and everyone in the area is offline, well then obviously the fix will come from NBN as the wholesaler to do that. If it turns out that the wrong thing is plugged into the wrong way, or there's something else in that's giving us a few dramas and problems, the diagnosis tools that are given from NBN to anyone who has the audacity to bill you for voice and broadband services, it's up to us to figure that out.
And in terms of structure, if there is a fault on the NBN network, your retail provider has to actually log an incident with NBN for that truck roll. So it's their responsibility to do the diagnostics on their end and go, look, we're sweet. We think there's an issue on NBN, log an incident with NBN, log a fault, and then we send a truck roll. So that's the delineation there.
So Brendan, you're calling your service provider. That's what you're doing. They're set up to sort it out.
Yeah, I was trying to get through to the service provider because it's absolutely hopeless. Sometimes, honestly...
Did I know you then,
Yeah,
Ian?
you do know me, unfortunately.
Look, it's a classic, like in Australia, we've just had quite an interesting FUBAR occur by NBN, right? So they come to the 12th of December last year and went, we have to stop selling the HFC network, which is Illawong's connection, by the way. That's a huge thing, and it'll be forever remembered amongst us telcos, and then for what that meant, and everyone suffered that continual outage, and I know NBN are going mad at the moment, trying to work out what that technical issue is, and coexist with different telcos at the same time. It's quite an involved thing. But all that being said, they stopped because they had lots of case history like yours, unfortunately, Ian, where you're trying to get through to the service provider, then they're trying to call NBN, and that just kind of went into a vortex of issues, right? So they stopped. So you've got to think, stop the bleeding and get it fixed, and that's what they've done, but now we're all sort of, part of history now, part of that.
What is the rough estimated upgrade cost to go from a fibre to the curb service to fibre to the premise?
We don't actually have the curb as a commercial product yet, so that will be coming down the line, the curb to the premise. But typically you're not talking about a long distance. It will be wholly dependent on the amount of civil work that needs to be done. So once that becomes productised, I think it's $600 to get a build design done and a quote. And then once you get your quote, you can decide whether or not you want to go ahead. And that quote includes somebody, scoping out the civil works and how much that's going to cost in terms of fibre curb. So we haven't switched it on, so I don't have any experience with the approximations. But typically the biggest cost is civil work. So with the fibre to node scenario, if we're boring under any roads and we have to close roads and things like that, that's where you're paying a lot of money. If it's just straight into a multi-port that's next door or something like that, it can be quite reasonable. In the fibre to the basement scenario, that if the conduit's good, it's usually quite cost effective. But typically with the fibre to the node scenario, you're looking at the thousands, not the hundreds, definitely the thousands. But when fibre to the curb comes online, we'll have a better indication of cost.
Just on the back of that, can I just ask a question?
Yeah.
Does the NBN have to do those works just on the back of the connection between the node to the premise? Does the NBN have to do it, or can the customer go and source their end?
Oh, no, because NBN, we have to do it, because then we're responsible for maintaining that network in perpetuity. So we can't have people doing plugging their own fibre into our network. Then we're responsible for maintaining, because we've got,
Will it help the connection, and will it be faster? Will it be more stable?
Well, I would always recommend that you get connected, work out what sort of bandwidth you require, what your current speeds are, speak to your retailer about, if you do need that additional bandwidth and what speed tiers you can actually purchase. Typically, it's very hard to get a speed tier over 140, and you can get 140 and will be able to get 140 on the fibre to the curb and the fibre to the node and the fibre to the basement technology. So unless you've got massive upload files, that's probably where the point would be.
Where's the node? Just assume, I don't know what the node is.
Typically our, if in a fibre to node scenario we build, it's like a 1 metre high green plinth. Next to, usually it's within range of the old Telstra pillar, the silver pillars. So that's in the fibre to node scenario. In
Copper to your place.
In fibre to the node, with fibre to the curb, we take fibre to the pit, which is in front of your premise, and then we use the copper from that pit, and we put equipment in the pit. So a distribution point unit, it's called, and that sits within the pit.
With those pits, we see a lot of problems when it rains, the water gets in. We are remediating a lot of pits. So as part of the fibre to the curb, there is quite a lot of work going in remediating, and actually we're having to put in new pits, so a lot of remediation work. So hopefully...
If there's a lot of residential, would you go to the basement?
Only in the multi-dwelling units scenario. So when you've got...
21 units.
Look, it depends depending on where you are. We do have a lot of different business rules about which technology goes where, based on density, cost, your distance from other infrastructure and things like that. So it can vary. But typically with a multi-dwelling unit is where we go fibre to the basement.
Okay.
Was there, Carly, did you have another question?
Just last one is coming down our residential street, where it's obviously jam-packed with a million different people trying to tap in at the moment. So we have on average 1 meg upload and 5 down, which is terrible. So I had 2 kids last year doing the HSC that could not submit work, which is terrible, okay? Doesn't help, can't tell you the tantrums that you get from 17-year-olds. But my question is that if you're using all the current infrastructure, how do you then fix things like that?
So in terms, we're only leveraging the existing infrastructure for that last mile. So in terms of the fibre to the nodes...
We might have 20,000 homes in that last mile.
No, you all have a copper pair that would go from your premise out to an existing pillar or to the pit. So
She's talking about the contention ratio.
Oh, contention ratios. Okay. Sorry, different from infrastructure. So in terms of our infrastructure, at a wholesale level, as I mentioned before, it has to be able to provide 25 megabits per second download across all technologies, our wireless and our satellite. On 90% of our fixed line, we need to get up to that 50 megabits per second. If you're talking about contention, who wants to?
I think you may be talking, it depends what area you're in. We've got a couple of our customers who are in areas that are currently on ADSL, but they're a long way from the exchange. They're getting terrible throughput.
3 kilometres from the exchange. And I would have had Telstra out 6 times last year and they go, I'm really sorry. You know, and it's terrible. And I worry that when NBN comes, that because we're at the end of the line, even though we're here in a big metropolitan city, that we're spending millions on this infrastructure for what? And I just hope that it's going to work.
Sorry, I'm passing it to the debater.
Yeah. Just to take it back a step. So, what Mariam was talking about, and what I mentioned earlier in using the last mile, is a term that we use in telco. So, in the case of a node will only service around about 200, 250 connections. So, at its worst, as the cable goes, not necessarily as the crow flies, you will be around about, at the absolute worst, around about 1,000 metres away from that node. That node, for all intents and purposes, is exactly like the exchange. So all the smarts, all the changeover to fibre, everything that ramps up your speeds is moved, in your case, if it is fibre to the node that's coming to your place, it's moved anything up to 2 kilometres closer. If you're 3 kilometres away from the exchange and you're getting 5 megabits down, there's a good chance you're anything up to 4.5 kilometres away as the cable goes up this street, down that street, goes to that pillar, goes to that one, and does all that sort of stuff. If you're in a fibre to the curb area, which is or will be the dominant technology used throughout this area, then all of the changeover, it's a little bit like going from a 2-lane road to a great big motorway, hopefully not one of the ones that are clogged around here every afternoon, but one that's good and works and has lots and lots of throughput. If you're on fibre to the curb, then that changeover point from your copper, your existing copper, to NBN's flash new fibre is just out at that pit lid down the end of the driveway or next to the neighbour's place, or somewhere within a house, either on the other side of the road or next door to you. It's very, very close. So that's where everyone gets these gains or these greater economies of scale, is because you're no longer transiting all the way back to whichever exchange it might be, whether it's the Miranda exchange, and so there's only a limited number of ports in there, and physically you can only be so far and get certain speeds. The whole point is bringing the network out into the suburbs, bringing it out into the streets, bringing it even right out the front of your door, if that's the case. So that's where you get all your increases in speed, and it just depends on which way that's delivered to you as to whether that infrastructure is sitting underneath the little concrete lid or it's down the road where your nearest pillar is. So I think you'll notice significant difference because of where that boundary point moves to.
Still has come to contention though, I think it's worth.
Sorry, and contention is a little bit like how many cars can fit on a motorway at any one time. So there's been lots of talk in the media around contention, people getting onto it. You hear all the comments like, this is no faster than what I had before on ADSL, why did I go through the change? I can only speak for Telstra as a retailer, but we don't operate using contention. So we don't say, okay, there's 60 of you in this area, we'll push you all down this one pipe and you can all fight for the bandwidth. At all of those 121 points of interconnect that Mariam referenced earlier, we work on utilisation. So a little bit like water flowing through a pipe, we make sure that it never goes past 75%. All those sorts of figures, all that sort of, utilisation and our performance is now subject to some pretty serious rules from the ACCC. They got involved late last year. That changed the way that we talk about speed. That changed the way we report on how well we're delivering the speeds that we're offering. And that's where some customers who are out on the edges of the network, where they maybe can't achieve speeds that they were paying for, have been reimbursed. They've got the option to love us or leave us. So if they're just not happy with it, there'll be no penalty for those sorts of outcomes. And look, I think that there was something that our CEO put out that I should have read in a bit more detail a few weeks ago when I just got back from Chrissy holidays. And it was, we were operating at something like 95% of the stated speeds people were achieving. So we were pretty happy with our outcome. Brad, in fairness, Brad, do you want to talk at all about contention or speed? Or?
No, I think it's covered.
Okay, Richard, and then Paul, and then we've got to
there
wrap
are
up.
two major industrial areas in the Shire, one at Jubilee and one at Tarrant Point. What's the plans? They've been operating mainly on ADSL 2, I think, at the moment. What's the plans to bring broadband NBN to those two areas?
Look, I had a look at the overall rollout map, and both of those suburb names are listed as being fibre to the curb, but within a greater area. And sorry, Mariam, I'm probably stealing what you should say, but within those greater areas, while the majority might be one particular access type, if you came across a particular industrial estate where all the lines run in and then it's all shared, across the various units or suites or factories or whatever it may be, then NBN may decide to use a different technology that's more appropriate to your or to that particular premise. A little bit like if there's a great big multi-storey block of units, all the low-rise stuff around them will get one technology type, and then a different will go into the big multi-rise.
To be honest, that's where my question about the exchange was, where Richard's question comes from, is Tarrant Point, because the exchange is so outdated, and that's so issues. So I think if you update the exchange, which is the interest.
Yeah. So not every exchange is used in this as well. So you actually skip a lot of exchanges. It takes around about 6,500 telephone exchanges of one shape or size to serve up the phone network and the broadband network on Telstra right across Australia right now. That reduces to 121 because of the use of optical fibre. Distance stops being a limitation, ports stop being a limitation. All that sort of stuff will get resolved that all of us have been struggling with for so long. So yeah, I think that will definitely help.
Yeah, Karen, my office is in Tarrant Point, and I completely sympathise with anyone in Tarrant Point. It's a tough area. I run fibre to my office, and then I try and share that with as many people around there just to give them a little bit of respite. It's really huge. Keep an eye out for the trucks. I've been seeing them around the Shire now. The NBN fibre is green, so have a look at the big cotton reel on the back of a truck, and it's green cable. That's the NBN cable going in.
Okay, Paul.
It's not blue, it's green.
Yeah, I want to ask a question about value for money and the costing and what we're getting for our costing. So probably an NBN and a Telstra combined question. If I go to Coles and buy a dozen eggs and I get to the checkout and there's only 11 eggs and Coles want to still charge me full price for a dozen, that's not really right. Telstra is charging me, I'm on the top tier, 100/40, and at best I'm getting 80% in either direction. I'm on HFC, I had Big Pond cable previously with a DOCSIS 3 modem, so I was on 100/2, what I was paying for. My mates that I used to work with in Telstra said, we will guarantee those numbers, and to guarantee it, we give you more. I was actually measuring 120 down and 2 1/4 to 2 3/4 upload. Since I've been to NBN, I cannot get better than 85, 90 down, even though I'm paying for 100, only getting 11 eggs. And of the 40 upload, which is fantastic compared to 2, because this 3 gig file that I'm going to produce out of this tonight, instead of taking me 2 days to upload, I'll upload it in an hour. That's great. But I'm paying for 40, I'm only getting 35. Who answers that?
I can start. So, as I mentioned earlier, we make a wholesale component product, and part of that is a traffic class system. So we have our traffic class 1 is really your enterprise grade service, which is a committed throughput rate. Your traffic class 4 at the low end is actually your up to. For a residential grade product, you'll find that the component product that you're purchasing is probably a traffic class for your broadband services, and we recommend a traffic class 1 obviously for your voice-based services, so they're prioritised over your data. So from a wholesale perspective, that residential grade product that you've purchased would typically be a traffic class 4, which is you're up to.
So it's all right to have a box of eggs that says there'll be up to a dozen eggs in this box.
Yeah, well, so I got in trouble last week for not checking the eggs when one broke on my wife, and she pulled it out and it just went everywhere. So I know how it feels to only get 11 eggs. We certainly got that last week. Yeah, and wearing one of them. There's a couple of other factors from our end. Using Wi-Fi will degrade the speed. So if you are a bit of a power user, and I completely appreciate uploading big files, especially video and that sort of stuff.
So I've got fixed right through to my house.
Beautiful. So the first step for everyone is that if you are experiencing a shortfall in speed, to use a wired connection rather than Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is fabulous for the convenience, cost, and all those sorts of things, but it does reduce depending on the distance, what it's going through, and how many people or how many devices, more importantly, are on it. The other point as well, and I don't mean to be rude, you are officially one of those customers who knew all the benefits and the wonders of the same product, or the product that we offered on what is now the same bit of cable. For a short period of time, there will be a period of what's called coexistence, and that's where we've still got some customers on the Big Pond cable product and that network, and NBN. So we've still got a dedicated slice of that frequency or that pipe going through the water, if you like. Foxtel are still using their slice of it, and NBN have the rest. So in some cases, you're not actually seeing the full benefit because Telstra and NBN are coexisting on that. Once everyone moves off the HFC network, the period of coexistence finishes and things ramp up for you on HFC. I'll give away I'll give away NBN's stories and all their good stuff that they tell us in secrecy because it's not them talking, but there is a roadmap to get that network to 1 gigabit fairly quickly. So once coexistence goes, your speeds will increase, and the opportunity to go even beyond 100 in coming years will come with it. So at the moment, unfortunately, you're going to get 11 eggs.
So I should only be paying for 11 eggs, though, shouldn't I?
Correct. Well, the hardest thing is that it's such a big jump from offering you a 50 meg download to a 100. So by all means, you could move to a 50, but you're potentially shooting yourself in the foot for 30 megabits. Which is hard. So we can only work with what's offered on that front. If you were down around 60, 65, then to Brad's point earlier, you would definitely look at something closer to that.
Thanks. It's in relation to the number of exchanges. You said there's going to be a significant reduction in exchanges. For some local businesses, they're easily identifiable by their telephone number, depending on their exchange. Will there be a change as a result of the reduction in exchanges?
There is, but it's usually the removal of frustration you had from moving from potentially one side of the street to the other, or one end of the main road to the other, where there used to be an exchange boundary. So those boundaries have increased, not immensely. So there are still rules around numbering. I can't go and give you a Melbourne-based number so that you could present Melbourne numbers when you're trying to market into new customers in Melbourne, even though you're still at the same office you've always been at. However, if before there was a limitation in moving from here to Miranda, for example, they hang or to Cronulla. So in your mind, you're not really moving that far away. You've got to change your entire phone number. We had a lot of this sort of a lot of problems with this in Canberra a long time ago, and people would move 10, 15 minutes away and change exchanges, have to change numbers, re-advertise everything, pay for diversions, all those sorts of things. So now that we're working to a broader area than just an exchange area, and it's I think they call it a standard calling unit or a standard zone unit. There's some funny name for it, but a check can be done if you're moving that you would be able to take your existing number just slightly beyond the suburb that you're in, but not necessarily to the other side of Sydney or interstate or anywhere like that.
But importantly, if you're migrating from your existing technology to NBN, you retain your number. So you're not going to lose your number.
But it is possible that if you knew the phone numbers for Guy Meyer and you knew the numbers for Miranda, and you could sort of work out roughly who's calling you on the basis of that, over time that will merge and blend as people move around. So it will become less common down to an exact suburb.
Thanks very much. If we can thank our speakers. Thank you.